In fact, it's clear-eyed about the fact that the poor and poverty is a complicated problem that doesn't have one-size-fits-all solutions. But I do think, as with all of the other topics, we find the way to live in the way of Jesus. I think he models 3 different ways to be part of the solution depending on where a person or a people group is stuck or held back from flourishing. And I'll move really, really quickly here for the sake of time. If you don't want to move quickly, if you want to move a little more slowly, let me just recommend a book for you that talks about these categories, and I think pretty well. The book is When Helping Hurts by a couple of guys, Brian Fickert and Steve Corbett. Subtitle is How to Alleviate Poverty Without Hurting the Poor and Yourself. If you're interested in diving a little deeper, I think it's helpful in the conversation. It's where I'm borrowing some of these concepts that we're going to talk about in the categories for us to think through as people like us that are trying to be a part of the solution and often find ourselves oscillating between being paralyzed and cynical. What you find out is when you walk in the way of Jesus, the way we saw Jesus walk last week, when you're willing to pause, when you're willing to get personal, when you're willing to partner with a person, you often find that the person in front of you and the people group around you is full of people not just with political issues, but with names and faces and needs. And as you get to know names and needs, what you often find is the challenges are complicated. And yet you see Jesus responding different ways depending on the person in front of him and the need that they had. You remember the Good Samaritan story. That's the first simple one to talk about. You see an unknown traveler who's walking around the side of the road, Luke chapter 15, and is not in the position to flourish. He's not even in a position to thrive. Luke 15, this traveler by the side of the road is a person who's fighting to survive. And you see what the good neighbor does? The good neighbor provides relief. Here's what relief is. Relief is something that we give to someone who likely won't survive if they don't get it. Relief, food, water, shelter, life-giving, life-saving medicine. This is what we normally think of, at least us, when we think of being there for the poor, helping the poor. Here's the thing. It's our most common response, but it's the least common need. Here's where it gets tricky. What if you go into a situation with relief where the temporary need for relief is over? You know what you do? It's a little like overwatering or over-fertilizing your garden. You can make everything worse. We could reinforce the sense of invisibility, shame. Remember the voices of the poor that we looked at earlier. We can rob people of their dignity, all the while feeling good about how we helped them when we bring relief to situations that no longer need relief. We can even hold someone in poverty, thinking that we're helping them out. Sometimes they don't need someone to do something for them. Sometimes they need somebody to do something with them. Call this rehabilitation. Rehabilitation. You see Jesus live this out, maybe most clearly with a woman named Mary Magdalene. When Jesus meets her, she is poor in all kinds of different ways. And he set her free. But then he walked with her and empowered her and helped her develop to a place where she herself was flourishing. Sometimes it's not a lack of food that's keeping a person from thriving. Sometimes what they really need is a friend to eat the food with, who can see them and hear them. Remind them that they're created in the image of God, that they have dignity and purpose and skills to offer the world where they live, who could help them uncover them and develop them and steward them well. Some of you saw the huge New York Times piece this week that studied upward mobility for the poor, and they determined the relationship connection was more important in a person's economic trajectory than their neighborhood, than their education, than their race, than any other characteristic that they have. That's huge. Often the poor in our lives don't need cash. They need connection. And sometimes they need our connections, our expertise, our influence, our referrals, our introductions. And that takes us to the last one. Write the word reform. Reform. This is where it gets really complicated and sometimes really controversial, doesn't it? Because this isn't just about giving something to someone. It's not even just about doing something with someone. Sometimes it's about going ahead of someone and clearing the path ahead of them to make sure that they have the structure and the strength and the systems that they need in order to flourish for the long haul. We've talked about the trellis in the garden before. That's the idea here. Creating structure and support for the young and the vulnerable so that they can have the strength or borrow the strength that they need in order to flourish. Jesus dealt with this in Luke chapter 14. You can read that story later. He talked about networking dinners in his day. And he challenged his followers to look at the social system around them, where the rich only invited the rich to their house for dinner, to make connections, to make business deals. And it created a social structure that either intentionally or inadvertently kept the poor outside. They didn't ever really have a chance. Jesus said, don't do that. Reform. Here's how this fleshes out in and through doxology, and then we'll close. If you go back and think about what this looks like for us and the kind of difference that we can make at a church, here's something I think you'll realize. Institutions, we can't do all of that. In fact, we're not necessarily in position to do all of that and do all of that well. We can champion some of that, but we can't do all of that. What organizations and institutions tend to be pretty good at is relief. We tend to be pretty good at coming in a moment and pooling our resources and sending a big infusion of resources to a place or to a person that can help them get back on their feet in a crisis situation. We tend to be pretty good about that. Some of you remember what we were able to do back at the very beginning of the crisis in Ukraine. Because of some of your proactive generosity, we were able to look around and see a need, make sure that a gift was going to be safe and secure and strategic, and then we made a huge investment, $50,000, that kept some people eating for months in Ukraine, all because of your proactive generosity and our ability to respond to a crisis need. We were able to go with relief. Churches tend to be good at that. Institutions tend to be good at that. Maybe closer to home, every Christmas we do a benevolence offering, and people give really generously so that people that are connected to you find themselves in a crisis situation. We as a church can immediately step in with relief, and we've been able to keep roofs over people. We've been able to provide people with food and water and access to some of the basic survival needs that they have in a crisis kind of situation. Churches are pretty good at that. When it comes to rehabilitation, that kind of thing takes relationships, takes a level of expertise and knowledge that we don't tend to have as an institution. Sort of like your general practitioner. When you go to your general practitioner, they're pretty good in a crisis of giving you a diagnosis. But one of the best gifts that they can give you is a referral to a specialist. That's why we take partnership around doxology so seriously. We've got partnerships with other ministries and other organizations around us like DASH or Union Gospel Mission or Beautiful Feet or The Net. People that wake up in the morning thinking about specifics on these issues, thinking about a particular specialty that can walk for a long period of time with people in wisdom and compassion, helping a person flourish from wherever they find themselves. And then, although it's complex and sometimes controversial, when it comes to reform, that's actually where it gets really exciting for us as a church. What's the church doing in the area of reform? Well, part of what we're able to do, it gets really personal and specific, is to fan out really great neighbors every single week who live according to the way of Jesus at the intersection of compassion and conviction and courage every place they go. We've got educators and business leaders and physicians and attorneys and soccer moms who fan out into the world every single day with eyes for the people around them and how they can step in and help for the long haul, big and small ways, from business owners who are intentionally connected with organizations that give job skills to the poor, giving graduates of some of those programs first shots of interviews, to attorneys that volunteer their time to make sure that underrepresented people have access to big shot representation, to people who spare time who give an hour every week to South Hills Elementary. You're going to hear some stories about that in just a minute, to clear a huge barrier for first, second, and third graders so that they have a chance to flourish over the long haul, to get upstream of some of the next generation's biggest challenges by going to work on the trellises in our corner of the garden. That's what the church is doing, is the people of God who care about the cares of God. But I wonder about you. I wonder what your part is from here. This topic may have started today at the bottom of your list. Don't underestimate its power in our world.